It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster.
A 25% increase. We're going to bring it from 25% to 50% the tariffs on steel into the United States of America.
Donald Trump imposes tariffs of 50% on steel and aluminium. It's only the UK that secures a carve-out, but will still pay 25% for now. Shoplifters stole hundreds of pounds worth of goods from this North London store yesterday. We'll hear from the shop owner as the country's most senior police officer warns about the impact of a spending squeeze. But the Chancellor is splashing the cash on transport projects in the north of England.
We will be making the biggest ever investment by a British government in transport links within our city regions and their surrounding towns.
And it's Prime Minister's Questions at noon. When Keir Starmer last faced MPs, he U-turned on means testing the winter fuel allowance for pensioners. Will he have to yield to pressure from Labour MPs to lift the two-child benefit cap? Joining us today, Labour MP Emma Lewell, former Mayor of Middlesbrough and Conservative donor Andy Preston, Liberal Democrat MP Tim Farron and pollster Luke Trill from More in Common. This is Politics Live. So let's start with that announcement from President Trump overnight. He signed an executive order doubling US tariffs on steel and aluminium imports to 50%. Now, it has been quite hard to keep up with all the announcements and the changes that he's made. The UK is temporarily exempted from this. You can see the BBC headline here. But we will still be paying 25% for now until that trade deal has been finalised. But we are paying half as much as anyone else. So I suppose the question is to you, Emma, is this a win for Keir Starmer?
I would say so. I mean, we're the first country to secure a trade deal with the United States. Our business sec was discussing with his counterpart this week about these tariffs, and there's a good relationship there. And, you know, we want both our countries to prosper. And there's an agreement there that we want that to happen. So I think this is really good news. And if you look at the work we did around steel, we saved British Steel. We saved all those jobs in Scunthorpe. I come from a town that knows what happens when a big industry is ripped out of it and how that destroys everything around that town. So we're doing good things in this area, and I think, you know, we've got the right people in place.
And did you think they've played it well, this?
No, I think Trump is erratic, unpredictable and really dangerous. I think what he did a month ago was he said he jacked tariffs right up. Keir Starmer then negotiated and gave some ground, and Trump reduced the new tariffs a little bit, and Starmer called that a win. It's not a win. Trump is a bully. He's economic illiterate. He's an economic thug. He's causing chaos in the US. Bond yields have gone through the roof. The dollar is very weak. Inflation is starting to pick up again, and we're being far too kind to him. I think Tim had said to me earlier, we were chatting beforehand, we should really be focused on working with Canada, Australia, like-minded, trustworthy nations to do great deals that we can rely on.
Tim, I was going to say you probably agree with most of that.
Yeah, you don't dance to the tune of a bully. This is not a win. Do we really want is the apex of our patriotism to be that weed carrying the mack of the bully as he kicks other people? I'm sorry, that is shameful. So I see no benefit to us in this. We're clearly being bullied into.
But we are the only ones who are going to be paying at the moment 25%.
For a period of
so we're paying half as much as anyone else.
If we sign the deal on his terms, sorry, that is not how two equal partners negotiate with each other on a public level. America, I hope, is a long-term ally and a friend, but for the time being, a totally unpredictable and unreliable one. So yes, absolutely, as we've said, we should be doing deals with countries we can rely upon. And just a few miles over the channel, there's one there where we could actually add £25 billion to the Exchequers take every year if we had what the Liberal Democrats are calling for, and that's a custom union-like arrangement with the European Union. Why we are wasting time and credibility to our own shame dealing with a man who is trying to bully us when we got friends over the channel is ludicrous, and that's costing jobs.
Luke, how do the public here view all of this, do you think, particularly our relations with Donald Trump?
Well, I think it's fair to say the British public aren't great fans of Donald Trump. In our latest polling, I think his net approval rating was -48, so it was pretty low. And what's interesting is we also asked the question, which countries do you see as an ally or as an enemy? And what we found is that now, under half of the UK public say that the US is an ally of the UK. And that's pretty extraordinary. You know, when you think about the special relationship, that sort of transatlantic bridge that we've got, it is definitely the case that Donald Trump, and particularly his more kind of erratic nature, has worried people. And when we speak to people in focus groups, they'll say, you know, I don't know what that guy, you know, sometimes they use less polite language, that guy in the White House is going to do next. So there's very definitely worry there. And when the deal was initially announced, the public tended to think the US got the better side of that deal. It'll be interesting to see if us having this lower rate makes people think, oh, you know, maybe it was worth it.
Doesn't it also mean that we can't really rely on, let's say we do sign the deal, and we've had all these promises about, you know, the food standards, animal welfare standards being protected. Are we going to trust it? We end up signing this under this sort of pressure, and we dance the tune of the bully. Who on earth believes that he's going to stick to the terms of this and protect our farmers? Of course he's not.
I don't think we're dancing to the tune of a bully when we're in negotiations with one of our biggest trading partners and we've actually got an exemption for steel. How are we being bullied and dancing to someone's tune there?
If we sign the agreement on his terms in his timescale.
But our discussion is ongoing, though. You're talking about in the future. The discussions are still ongoing at this moment in time.
I think this isn't an exemption. This is a bribe to accept a broad-based, loose deal that suits the US and not really us. This is a bribe.
What are you worried that we're going to give way on?
I think that we're going to give way on a million things, but I don't think any of us have sat down and thought it through. He is pushing things through as fast as he can. He wants as little attention to detail as possible so he can make his announcements, but he's causing economic havoc in the USA. We shouldn't get too close to him.
Tim?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we saw, without the pressure that the UK is under with America, the mistakes, I mean, obvious mistakes the Conservative government made over the deals with Australia and New Zealand in the last Parliament, or they threw British farmers under a bus signing up to equivalent agreements when you've got much lower quality animal welfare and environmental standards in those countries. Times that by 10 with the United States, the damage to our farmers, to our ability to feed ourselves as a country, to food security is significant, and you need time to consider these things to make sure you go through the details.
And that's why it's ongoing. That's why discussions are ongoing, though, Tim, because we are considering it. We're not being bullied. We're not dancing anyone's tune.
But what I'm saying is that his announcement overnight is no win for the United Kingdom. It is Donald Trump saying, this is your timescale, this is what you've got to sign up to, and it's up to the UK government to show some backbone.
I think people in the Scunthorpe plant would
no.
see this as a win, and I think those thousands of people whose jobs were saved would see that as a win as well.
I think he's saying the public are pragmatic on this. They don't like Donald Trump, but ultimately what they care about is what is the best deal we can get for the UK economy. So if you look at Starmer, he's generally got plaudits for how he's handled Donald Trump amongst the public. So I think there's a bit of a balance there. And as you say, saving jobs, I think, is more important to most people than having a fight with the president.
But of course, if in the long run, what happens, you end up basically giving in to a bully. They know what they can get away with next time round.
And you can support your steel industry. You can support your steel industry without doing deals with the devil. You can subsidise your own industry, nationalise it, do all kinds of things.
Which
you
is what
don't
we've
have
done.
to enter into stupid deals.
And we know that the benefit to GDP and to British jobs of the deal that's on the table with America is a fraction of the one we could have with the European Union. So why not trade and have deals with people who we A, can trust, and B, are offering us an infinitely better deal?
We're doing trade deals with lots of different countries, and I would say, you know, what we're supposed to do, just ignore the fact that Donald Trump is president. Do you know, you have to work with people.
If you've got to be pragmatic about this, they are still a big economy, and we still do have to deal with him. You don't need to call it the special relationship.
No, I mean, we deal with countries far less pleasant even than the one led by Donald Trump. But the point is, what is Trump's announcement about today? It's giving the United Kingdom a narrow timescale on his terms to agree to his terms. And the answer to that for the United Kingdom must be any deal that we enter into, A, must be on equal terms. At the moment, it absolutely isn't. And B, you need to stick to it. And the problem is we can potentially achieve A, maybe. B, we now know the character of this man as if he's going to stick to the terms of any deal. So we need to be focusing our attentions, our efforts, our energy, our political capital on deals with the European Union and other countries who are reliable partners. He is not.
OK, let's move on and have a look at this headline in The Times. Police cuts will mean some crimes must be ignored. Now, this is Sir Mark Rowley, the head of the Metropolitan Police. He's written to Sir Keir Starmer, warning him that cost-cutting will have far reaching consequences. This time next week, of course, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, will be delivering her spending review, where lots of departments are expecting a pretty severe spending squeeze. Now, let's have a look at this CCTV footage.
Get out. Yes, no, get out. Get out right now. You're on camera. Get out and put those down. Put them down.
Now, that was happening yesterday in a shop in North London. It's owned by Elsa Rand, who joins us now. Thank you very much for speaking to us. I mean, that looks like a very, very difficult and alarming situation for you. Can you just tell us what happened?
Well, I spotted the three people walking by. I have seen them before. I know they're thieves, so I was really going to head to the door and just lock the door, but they got in too quickly. And I asked them to leave. I said I'd had a phone call, I had an emergency, and they just swarmed a certain section of the shop, grabbed and ran. And it is very frightening.
And has this happened to you before? Have you noticed an increase in shoplifting in recent months or years?
There's a particular brand that is attracting people because it's very popular. That has made things worse. I saw a huge difference when with a big police cuts happened several years ago, and we lost our local little office, and we had a regular neighborhood group then, the police, who were around every single day, several times a day. We'd see them walking the street, they walked the area. And when we lost them, that's when things really took a nosedive. Because they, you know, I know the police do the best they can. I don't blame them. But the cuts that happened during, it was about 10, 12 years ago, that made a huge difference.
And how have the police responded to this incident or recent incidences of shoplifting in your shop?
They've been amazing. I had 6 police people that went out looking for them because I had to call 999 because one of them hit me. And they were fantastic. They came out very quickly. They called me to let me know they were going to look for them first. Was I okay? Did they mind if they came after? Thought it was very considerate. And sorry, it was upsetting, and it's bringing it back.
Yeah, that must have been a very, very difficult experience for you. And I think a lot of shopkeepers we've heard from in recent months are experiencing this. They do say they think that it is on the rise. If you could give a message, you're a Labour Party member, if you could give a message to Keir Starmer about what he should be doing in terms of policing, because there are lots of speculation that there may well be cuts to the Home Office next week, what would your message be to the Prime Minister?
I would put as much as they can into local policing, because if we have those local people on the beat, and they believe me, the police know what's going on, but they don't have enough people in each area to stop it. If they're there as a deterrent, it's going to end. We didn't have this before all those cuts. We didn't have it. Honestly, it never happened. And it's constant now because we don't have a daily police presence. And I know they can't afford it. That's where then money should go, to local policing. Honestly, it would help beyond measure. My husband works, he's an engineer. His van's been broken into several times. Our neighbor's car's been stolen once and broken into. If there's no local police around all the time, they know they can get away with everything.
Elsa, stay with us. Emma, you can tell there how distressing this is for shop owners, and we've heard it a lot, haven't we? What do you think now the government should do? There's lots of speculation that the Home Office will face real terms cuts potentially, and there's a massive squeeze on police spending. What's your answer to her?
I mean, it's awful what Elsa's been through, and I've worked myself in small independent shops, and I know what it's like when someone comes in and attacks you and wants to steal the things in your shop. But, you know, we've got a bill currently going through the House where we're increasing neighbourhood policing by 13,000. We're investing in the police. That legislation is already passing through the House, so things should change. Elsa rightly said, when the cuts came, these things started happening. We're trying to repair the damage that the last government left. It will take us time, but that legislation is going through the House.
Can you afford
right
these
now.
new community officers? Will you be able to pay for it?
Well, that legislation is going through the House on the promise that those 13,000 police officers, neighbourhood police officers, will be in place. We've also introduced a new offence in that legislation against attacks on shop workers and people like Elsa. And also, you know, one of the big things that we scrapped, which was what a lot of retailers said was increasing shop theft, was the limit put on by the last government, where they said any theft under £200 or under, you would get a lesser fine for and a lesser police sentence. And that is what retailers told us was the single most reason for the increase in shop thefts. So we've abolished that as well.
Andy, you're a Conservative Party donor. You can tell that Elsa there thinks that these cuts happened a while ago and they've had an impact.
They really did, absolutely. What happened was there were fewer and fewer police. The police are stretched, so they prioritised violence. And the poor lady there with that horrible experience, I think the reason she's got such rapid and strong attention from the police is because violence was involved. If they had stolen something and disappeared, there would be very little interest. They focus on violence, and rightly so. But what we need is more and more and more coppers. And you can categorically draw a line from the withdrawal of police from the community and the massive proliferation of shoplifting. Shoplifting has horrendous consequences. It's murdering town centres, which are already struggling. Decent people, why shouldn't they go and shoplift? The consequences are non-existent.
Do you think it was a mistake for the previous Conservative government?
A monstrous mistake. And we've got an announcement today on infrastructure, which we'll talk about, which sounds great, and it is great. I would much rather, instead of racking up more debt, I would much rather that we were funding more coppers. That's real levelling up, getting crime down, making shop workers and community people feel safe.
Luke, how do the public feel about this? Because it isn't just shoplifting, it's stealing bikes. As she said, they're breaking into cars. There is a sense, isn't there, amongst the public that things have got worse?
Oh, very definitely. And not just got worse, but, you know, we'll talk to people in focus groups and they basically will say we think that what is sometimes, I think, mistakenly called low-level crime, so things like antisocial behaviour, shoplifting, you know, for the people affected or anything but low level, but a sense that it's almost been decriminalised. And people say the only reason I call the police now is to get a crime reference number, because I know that they won't investigate it. I know that they won't be able to stop it and deal with it. And it totally undermines trust. And it also has sort of second order effects, because people then say, when we chat to them in focus groups, you know, I go to the supermarket now and everything's in little plastic boxes or plastic cages because of shoplifting. And that has an effect on how people think about their community as well. So, as I say, one of my biggest frustrations is the sort of dismissal of this as sort of low level. You've got to get a grip on it because it affects everything else. And when you ask the public, what do they want? What do you want the police to do? It is exactly what Elsa said. They want more local police on the beat. They want visible policing because they know that that deters criminals.
And Tim, doesn't your party have to take some responsibility for this? You were part of that coalition. Thousands and thousands of community police officers were cut because of austerity.
Yeah, I mean, austerity began in 2008. Important to remember that, under Gordon Brown. But the coalition... Oh, no, it did. I mean, that's obvious. I mean, we cut less than... We're going into history, so let me tell you that's true history.
Let's start in 2010 for now.
Well, let's start in 2008 when it actually began. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I felt that the decisions that were made in terms of, I mean, over the last, 17 years have had a significant impact. And more importantly, I'm massively grateful to Elsa for saying what she has said, because we can all quote statistics at 270,000 shoplifting offences not resolved last year. And statistics, yeah, but that's a personal experience. It's a reminder that this is not acceptable and it has huge consequences for individuals and for businesses. And amongst the decisions and the failures, and by the way, I do take responsibility for it. I just think it's important we remember that it's broader than just one era of government, because one of the failings was not specifically the cutting of police numbers. It was the idea that cutting back office admin numbers was somehow a acceptable form of saving. It absolutely wasn't. So in Cumbria, where you could be 20 miles from the next nearest police officer, there's a good chance that police officer who would be nearest to you to help in those circumstances will be stuck doing admin because we got rid of, and I say we to some extent, all parties in government over the last sort of 17 years, got rid of people who were supporting officers otherwise to be on the front foot. So community policing is the answer to this, visibility. But like Lou says, I think there's something about, I don't know, the atomisation, privatisation, the selfishness of society, that these things are a more common effect. I think, I mean, not obviously in small shops like Elsa's, but I think people feel they can get away with it in places where you don't have staffed checkouts. Shout out to the best supermarket in the country, Booths, which is the better Waitrose for the Northwest, who got rid of their
other supermarkets.
But they got rid of the automated checkouts, backed fully to human operated tills. And I think understanding that we relate to one another as human beings rather than as objects is much better. But that's why we need community policing.
Elsa, just to come back to you on that, do you think that attitudes of the public have changed? Do you think that it's become more acceptable to steal?
I am very fortunate to be in a neighborhood that where we're supported by our local community. And I had a lot of people in yesterday saying, we saw the police, are you okay? Sorry, it was very touching. Not in my area, but yes, I imagine in some. And oddly, I work one day a week at Waitrose because I really enjoy that job. And I will say that maybe a little bit on the self-checkout is a mistake, and some of it's the tap and go and they've gone before the card went through, and sometimes it's intentional, and so maybe it is a problem. I find it's more people, for me, it's always the addicts. You can tell they're drug addicts. It's and I don't know if they have nowhere to go. I don't know what the solution is. I'm not a person who knows every solution. I don't think I do. But it is very specific people in my situation who are doing these things. It is not local people. It is not people who want to come in and buy and support local shops. It really isn't.
Elsa, thank you so much for speaking to us today, and we can tell that was a very difficult experience for you yesterday, and we hope that you get it resolved. Thank you for speaking to us. Do you think, Emma, that people's attitudes have changed? Do you think that people think it's acceptable to steal, and then that the other people in society think that there is lawlessness?
Well, I think it goes back to what I said earlier, that the conditions were created where if you stole under the value of £200, you weren't going to get punished. We're trying to redress that balance now. And I think it goes back to the lack of neighbourhood policing, which is, again, something we're trying to address. Once you have a high presence of neighbourhood policing and you reverse some of those things, then that will change. If you make the conditions right for people to steal, then they will steal.
Yeah, can I add in something that the lady Elsa, I think her name was, made clear there when she works at Waitrose, that a lot of the thefts are to do with tap and go, pretending that you've paid, the self-service. I can quote thousands of scientific examples where if you trust people but say there are no consequences for breaking the rules, they will break the rules, even good people, and that's what's happened. There are no consequences, and guess what? Shoplifting has gone through the roof. We need consequences for action. It's obvious. We need to get back to that basic, simple, honest way of life.
But then is there a problem? Because if you look at courts, for example, it's not going that way, is it? The courts have got lots of backlogs. People would say, well, we haven't got the capacity to deal with these criminals.
We don't have the capacity, and the prisons are full, which is insane. But again, that's just laziness. It's about politicians making the wrong choice, trying to keep the public happy in the short term, but creating a much bigger issue down the line. And that's still going on, by the way, with this government. I think the previous government did it, and I just hope that the next one doesn't. We need to be honest with the public. You can't have your cake and eat it.
Well, we're talking there about spending. That is at the root of some of this, at least. That's certainly what some people believe. Rachel Reeves, this time next week, will be delivering her spending review. She's been talking about some of that today.
Now, even with those decisions, and even with that injection of cash, not every department will get everything that they want next week. And I have had to say no to things that I want to do too. But that's not because of my fiscal rules. It is a result of 14 years of conservative maltreatment of our public services, our public realm, and of our economy.
So, cuts presumably coming. I think certainly a lot of cabinet ministers think that is the case. Emma, is that going to be the case?
Well, I don't know. It's above my pay grade. I'm a lonely backbencher, so All I know is that I will be trying to champion investment for my area, and there's been a great announcement today around the biggest transport spending ever in England, which will greatly benefit my area, and I'll keep fighting for that.
And so the Conservatives are to blame for all of this. I think that's fair.
I think that lazy politics is to blame for all of this. Of course, we had an awful economic recession, 2008, which carried on for years and years. Of course, we've had COVID. We've had a war in the Ukraine, which impacted grain prices and oil prices. But at the end of the day, lazy politics is to blame. We've had politicians that for too long say to the public, we'll spend more and tax you less. The public want to hear it, but we mustn't keep doing it. We're on the road to bankruptcy. And I fear today that the infrastructure announcements are pushing us further down that road, actually.
Yeah.
We already have £100 billion of interest that we shell out every year on existing debt, and this government's borrowed more.
We're going to talk about the transport investment in just a second, but just before we get to that, this is the Mirror headline. Rachel Reeves warned child poverty will be higher at the next election unless one choice is made. This, of course, is about the restrictions on what families can claim when they're on benefits for more than 2 children. And it's proving a pretty contentious issue in your party. Emma, what do you think should happen to this child benefit cap, as it's called? It's not actually about child benefit. I think it's worth explaining that. It's about
lots of confusion.
the child element of universal credit.
I've always been in favour of scrapping it. I still am. I've been putting pressure on my party. I've made submissions to our child poverty strategy review. I just think, you know, no one wins when children are living in poverty. There's 4.5 million children living in poverty in this country. Poverty costs, and these children are living in families of taxpayers. They're living in families where people are actually in work, going out to work day in and day out for their poverty. There is something fundamentally wrong there. And I know that, you know, our plans are for growth, and we've got an industrial strategy, and we've upped people's wages, but that will take time to embed. These children don't have time. This is ruining and blighting their childhood. So before our reforms kick in properly, we need to scrap this to lift those thousands of children immediately out of poverty.
So, Andy, the cost is £3.5 billion. Do you think that the government, that the country can afford to reverse this cap?
So we can't afford to magic £3.5 billion. Should we do this is a really interesting and difficult question that's dividing all politicians. Even within parties, people are divided. And both sides are right. I've had people come to me and say, well, why should I, when I'm struggling, pay for the lady down the road to have another kid that she can't afford? Why should I be... And that's right.
So it's about personal responsibility.
But yes, it is. But at the same time, if that lady does have another child, it growing up in extreme poverty, and its siblings and their parents living in extreme poverty, costs infinitely more in the long run. So both sides are spot on. Personally, I think what we have to do, and I hate to be a centrist on this, but what we have to do is find a middle way. And what I would suggest is for more than 2 kids, we give a voucher for essentials like food. Not hand over money, certainly not hand over lots of money, but find a middle way to make sure nobody's going hungry. We don't want kids doing badly at school, being more likely to be locked up in prison or unemployed. We want everyone to be productive and pay tax.
Emma, you're shaking your head at that. Why?
Anyone who lives in poverty, if you say it, then we're going to give you a voucher system. That's so stigmatising. And who would administer it? The costs of doing all of that. And I go back to one of the points I made at the start of this debate, is that poverty costs. So it costs every single taxpayer more when children are living in poverty. It makes more sense for us to take children out of poverty, because then everybody benefits. And I know this isn't a popular thing in my party, but, you know, I'm a fan of wealth taxes. I think we should be looking at things like that. You know, 2% wealth tax on assets over £10 million would raise £24 billion per year, and it would affect 0.04% of the
Andy,
population.
is that the answer? You're a donor to the Tory party.
Okay,
I'm not.
So I want to see as much money raised in tax as possible, but every time you put a tax up, there are consequences. Every single time you do that. There is no evidence anywhere in the world of wealth taxes being affected. In fact, pretty much everywhere that brings them in either gets rid of them or waters them down to such an extent that they're meaningless. We need to find a better way of raising more money.
There is evidence.
Yeah.
There is evidence that the banking levy, which the last government reduced massively, did raise £4 billion a year. There is evidence that a better targeted digital sales tax would raise £4 billion a year. This is about choices. I think this is completely a moral issue with a fiscal element to it, a moral issue that we allow. There's no doubt the biggest single thing that any government could do to tackle child poverty at this moment will be to lift this cap. The majority of people receiving these benefits in my constituency or on universal credit are in work. They'll be working multiple jobs on minimum wage, and these are hard-working people trying to raise their kids and barely able to afford to feed them. Yes, it costs money, but there are relatively easy adjustments to what we do with taxation without going down the route of the wealth tax that we could just simply put right in the coming statement that would end child poverty for hundreds of thousands of people. It's a moral imperative, and they should just do it.
Luke, where does it stand when you speak to focus groups?
So actually, this is one of those areas, and it might sound an odd thing for me to say, which I think shows the limitations of polling to some degree. Because when you just poll on it, when you ask people a straight question, should people with more than 2 kids get the benefit? People saying, no, keep the cap. When you then talk to people in a focus group about it, they start going, oh, but is it fair on the children? And it's them that are going to suffer. And then what we've found is if you make the opposite argument, the argument like Emma was making to people that, you know, this is about getting people out of poverty, that it will save money in the long run, then support flips. It's what Tony Blair used to call the difference between the 3-second, 30-second and 3-minute conversation with people. And I think more fundamentally, and, you know, look, you know, Tim's making the moral case, looking at it purely in public opinion terms, when you ask people, what do you elect a Labour government for? I think it's really interesting. 3 things come out. It's to look after the working class, it's to improve public services, and it's to tackle poverty. And I think one of the problems this government has suffered from is people haven't seen that sense of purpose from them. So what I would say is, yes, the headline figures are people would rather keep the cap. But if this government were to go out and make the case, I actually think they could win the argument with the public, and they perhaps ought to have more bravery to go out and do it.
Emma, do you have any hope that the government will do what you want them to do?
I think so.
There's a poverty review into child poverty, isn't there, which has been slightly delayed until the autumn.
And it's been delayed because there's lots of MPs like myself making the case for scrapping this cap. So I think they're trying to look at ways to do this, but we'll only know once the strategy's revealed. But I think ultimately it's about us keeping the pressure on and making that case that this is the right thing to do. And Labour governments have always dragged children out of child poverty. And this one will. If I make so in my last breath in my body, I will make sure that it's something we do.
Do you think that the Chancellor should change her fiscal rules, so-called fiscal rules, which are, you know, binding her in to a certain extent? She talked about them today in her speech and said that it was important to have them and she had to have them, and she blames the last Tory government, Liz Truss. She said if you ignore rules, then the markets don't like it. But do you think she should alter that, loosen them up a bit?
I mean, it's self-imposed, and all governments, you know, put rules and things in place, and you can always change it around. You can look at other solutions, you can look at different things. And I would say one thing in terms of how the public feel, there isn't a single door I've knocked on or a single time I've walked down my high street and someone said, oh, for the love of God, please stick to your fiscal rules. You know, it's not something that anyone is really interested in.
But what
they're interested in is public services, child poverty.
But to explain to me, it's about borrowing, partly. It's about how much a government should borrow, that they shouldn't borrow too much. That's one of them, isn't it? So this is an important thing for the economy.
It is an important thing.
It's very expensive to borrow money.
Yeah, it is expensive to borrow money. But, you know, like I said, sometimes when, you know, we came into government and we were left an appalling mess, the Tories decimated this country. And we are trying our best to rebuild. And sometimes you have to change the rules that you're using to help you on that path to rebuilding. And I think putting ourselves in a straitjacket and saying, no, we're going to stick to this no matter what, is probably something we should look at and maybe have a bit wriggle room around.
Andy, what do you make of that in terms of whether we should be borrowing more money?
OK, so borrowing more money is normally a daft idea, but a case can be made to invest, clearly. Right now, I think that what we have is a housing crisis, which isn't just a crisis of too few houses. It pushes people into poverty, financial poverty, because they can't afford their rent or their mortgage. But beyond that, absolute poverty, living in a filthy slum, because you're in emergency accommodation, because you've been kicked out, because someone's willing to pay more rent. So that's the biggest issue for families, in my opinion. So I believe there could be a temporary amendment to a policy to borrow some money, to create new housing, to get people off the streets, out of emergency B&B accommodation that's going to benefit kids. And that would be far more valuable than abolishing a cap that is morally questionable anyway. But most importantly, I think that the public would get behind that and everybody would feel the benefit.
Let's just talk about investment a little bit more, because as we saw there, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves has been announcing ahead of that spending review, where we're going to hear that things are tight for departments, government departments. She's actually splashing the cash a little bit when it comes to certain projects. Joining us is Kevin Fitzpatrick, who's the BBC's political reporter in Greater Manchester. And Kevin, you've been at the Chancellor's speech. What has she had to say?
Well, essentially, she was setting the tone for big borrowing and spending on capital projects to come. The message was that underinvestment is a central barrier to growth, she said. And she said that the Green Book was being reviewed and will be rewritten to end the exhausted idea that just a few areas and industries can power the economy. And this will have been music to the ears of northern leaders like Mayor Andy Burnham, who was there, and also right across the area, who've been calling for better investment in the north of England to try and grow the economies. So this initial announcement today of £15.6 billion for local transport infrastructure projects like the expansion in some areas of the Metrolink here behind me in Greater Manchester, focused on places like the north, particularly the Midlands and the southwest. That will have been welcomed, and that's part of a taster, I think she was saying, of what's to come next week.
And have you got any sense of how long this will take? I mean, we know, of course, that infrastructure projects, they have to be built. Of course they do. It's not going to happen in the next few months. Do you have a sense of how long it might be before people there actually start to notice a difference?
Well, there's a wide range of projects, even just here in Greater Manchester. So some of the ones like taking a new Metrolink line down to Stockport, which has been called for decades and has been promised numerous times, but this is the first time the money's actually been committed to it. That's clearly going to take a number of years. They haven't quite yet finalised which route it's going to take, and there could be a couple of bridges involved in that. But other things like the money for the rollout in Greater Manchester, £2.5 billion's coming to Greater Manchester, and as part of that is the tram network, but the rest of it is the further rollout of the electrification of the bus network. So that's clearly going to happen a lot quicker, and as part of this funding promise, Greater Manchester has committed to have a fully electric bus service and network by 2030. So some of the things will happen quite a bit quicker, but others, the big infrastructure projects, even though they are local infrastructure projects, are clearly going to take a few years. But this money is being committed, we are told, to get the ball rolling on those projects.
Kevin, thank you very much indeed. Tim, this looks like there's a focus on parts of the north of England. Are you happy with this?
No. No, because this appears to be, I hope this is not an exhaustive list, because if it is an exhaustive list, then the Chancellor clearly thinks the North West stops at the M62. If it's through 2/3 of the northwest of England is Cumbria and Lancashire. As far as I can tell, there's not a single penny for either of those two huge counties, not a single penny. This looks like a package of measures for the metropolitan north. Good, fine. But, for example, the A66, which is a massively important arterial route between the west coast and the east coast in the north of England, connecting the northwest and the northeast, connecting the ports on the east and the west of northern England and indeed the south of Scotland. Desperate. 25% of all the traffic on that road is freight, and yet 12 miles of it is single carriageway. So if this is exhaustive, this is the Chancellor saying that she does not care about the far northwest and anything really north of the River Mersey.
We'll see if there's more. She has said that there might be more next week.
And the impact will be huge if she doesn't do this. I mean, politically, I think it'd be huge for Labour to be seen to have decided to ignore the rural north of the UK, particularly the northwest. But the impact also, it's not just about investment. And I agree, by the way, that borrowing to invest in infrastructure is an intelligent thing. Borrowing to invest for revenue spending is a foolish thing. But this would be a great thing to drive the economy of the north. And if they fail to do that, not only is that a massive economic mistake, an own goal, we have to remember that those 12 miles of the A66 are where all the deaths happen, the tragedies happen along that important road. So I'm very, very hopeful, or doing my best to work over the next few days alongside other colleagues from all parties to persuade the Chancellor that there is something in the northwest.
I'm sure she's listening. I'm sure she's listening.
Yeah.
What does the public feel about this? I mean, we heard it all levelling up under Boris Johnson, and I think there will be some communities who feel they heard a lot about that, but it didn't actually amount to anything.
Exactly that. Look, you can quibble with the execution of levelling up, but when you spoke to people about the idea, they were like, yes, we want this. For too long, we've sort of, seen London, the South East, get all of the dosh, and none of it has come here. Our communities have been neglected. And I actually think a mistake this government made when it came in was to be seen to move away from that too quickly. A lot of the sort of early dash for growth stuff was Heathrow expansion, London, the Golden Triangle, Oxford and Cambridge, to which, people in the North East and North West, Yorkshire and Humber would sort of say, well, it's growth for them, but not for us. And so this looks like a bit of a repivot. And this is the sort of stuff that people say, yeah, I elect a government for this, to make it easier for me to be connected, to make my high street viable again, because I can actually get to it. So I think this will be very popular if it's executed, but it can't be seen to be sort of picking particular winners if there are parts of the north of England which are going to be neglected.
Yeah, particularly a lot of those, by the way, we talked about how quick these things can happen. So I mentioned the A66, shovels are in the ground. There's a whole bunch of projects out there the government looks like it's not prioritising that could be delivered within months.
Tim's making his case very strongly here. Emma, you must be pretty pleased.
You too, yeah. And, as Tim said, there may be more to come. I mean, I'm over the moon. The one thing that people always will say, especially in my part of the world in the North East, is connectivity is spoiling jobs, spoiling investment. We've been underinvested in for so long. The Tories talked a good talk and had lots of nice slogans, levelling up, Northern Powerhouse. We're actually delivering on it, though. So I'm really pleased with this announcement. I hope it's the start of more to come, because it'll not only create jobs in my area, attract more businesses, because the North East is a great place to do business. It will also create jobs for those people who are building the infrastructure. So it's a win-win all round.
We want to be able to get there safely.
Can I say, as a northerner, I welcome it, but I think economically and morally it's absolutely dreadful. I think that what this is all about, Nigel Farage, this isn't about compassion or socialism or kindness or levelling up. This is about Nigel Farage. That's what caused this knee-jerk reaction. Knee-jerk reactions where money is involved are always wrong. They're always dumb and they always cause more trouble. This is about long-term projects that might get a headline now. They might get another headline as they get near, but they're years away. Building a bridge somewhere in Manchester in 10 years' time is not going to solve Labour's Nigel Farage problem. But to talk about the money and the morals, £100 billion would completely eradicate homelessness. The financial benefits and impact of that would be incredible as people have more money in their pocket, they're able to get a job and pay tax.
Businesses going to that area because there's poor transport links, then they'll not get jobs, they'll not have money in their pocket.
Curing homelessness will do incredible things for the economy. We don't have time now, but I can show you the numbers. Incredible things.
Can I just say...
And this could have been fixed. This is a socialist government that doesn't have any socialism in them.
Can I
Emma,
just say...
you don't have any socialism in you.
I mean, I think anyone listening to me today can see I very much do. And what I would say is, you're saying that this is a knee-jerk reaction to Nigel Farage. The announcements made today, there's been myself and colleagues, and in particular Sharon Hodgson, one of my colleagues, has been working on some of this for over a decade. So it's definitely not a knee-jerk reaction to Nigel Farage. These have been in the pipeline for a very long time.
Andy?
I think we all know that it was a knee-jerk reaction. The announcement came at a particular time. He is their biggest problem right now. They're very scared. He knows it and they know it. Look, either way, £100 billion can eradicate homelessness in the UK. That isn't just a moral necessity. Financially, the boost to the economy, people in work, kids doing better at school, lower bills to the criminal justice system and the healthcare system. £100 billion fixes homelessness. That's what they should do.
But you need a workforce.
Yes,
we haven't got barely half the workforce that we need to deliver.
We're going to be going to Prime Minister's questions in just a couple of minutes. And Andy, you are a Conservative Party donor. What have you made of Kemi Badenoch's performance, not just at Prime Minister's questions every week, but as leader?
I think that I certainly can't speak for her or even for the Conservative Party, but I believe that Kemi Badenoch's approach, which has widespread support amongst senior members, is to redo it, to go back to basics, to work out what do we stand for, what do we deliver, what do we want to deliver, what can we do to make Britain financially stronger, more morally superior and more effective in every single way it operates. And that takes time. So having a 3, 6 or even a 9-month re-evaluation makes sense. However, obviously, the polls are not bad, they are awfully bad. So there's some pressure there. What I expect to see, and I can't speak for anyone over in the near term now, is is a bit more stepping up and some more announcements coming out before Kemi probably initially wanted to make sure that, because there are some really exciting stuff, some really exciting things being talked about and in the pipeline, but I think we'll start to see a drip of really exciting centre-right solutions to problems.
So you want to see more policies? She said she's not going to rush into them.
I agree with her that they should not be rushed, but I think the situation is such that there has to be a release of information and be willing to share ideas more openly, more early.
Because there's a vacuum and it's being filled by, up to some extent,
absolutely,
Nigel Farage?
Nigel Farage.
Can I say on that? I mean, talking about the coalition earlier on, there was a point during the coalition where we went from being unpopular to being totally irrelevant. And I feel that's where the Tories are now.
Yep.
And so policies and ideas, but the tone, the posture of the Conservative Party appears to be that they're more spooked by reform than other parties. I was with a new colleague of mine, Jamie Green, MSP in Scotland, who was a Conservative, is now a Liberal Democrat. And I think there's a view out there that why would you vote for Reform Light when you could vote Reform? And yet Kemi Badenoch is trying to make the Tories Reform Light. And as a result, what she's doing, she's alienating people like Jamie, moderate Conservatives who just want the economy to work.
Luke, how are the public responding to Kemi Badenoch?
I think the challenge is when you play clips of Kemi in a focus group, people quite like her and they say, oh, she's refreshing, she's different. The problem is it's the first time they've seen her. So it's cut through rather than the person. And, you know, the difficulty is Labour in government, they can cut through. Nigel Farage is just a master of cutting through. I think the Conservatives really need to work out what their niche is in order to be able to get through to the public.
Are the public listening to what the Conservatives had to say? Because so often they would say, well, you've had 14 years.
And they absolutely say that. And I think the difficulty is ordinarily an opposition party would go away and lick its wounds for a bit, you know, like the Liberal Democrats did after the coalition. The problem is with this challenger party on the right, there isn't that time that there normally would be in an electoral cycle to do that. And so it's forced everything into kind of fast forward, and that's difficult.
Let's cross to the chamber now for Prime Minister's questions.
Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we're investing £15.6 billion in transport infrastructure of the North and of the Midlands. Mr. Speaker, we're decisively turning the page on a failed economic model of low investment, and we're backing the talent and prospects of the whole country. And over coming weeks, we'll set out plans for further investment and renewal. Mr. Speaker, our strategic defence review shows this government will never gamble with our national security. Through the biggest sustained increase since the Cold War, we will transform our defence, strengthen our nation and invest in jobs and industry across the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. Speaker, we all remember the glorious summer in 2012 when the world's greatest athletes came to London to compete in the Olympics and the Paralympics. It showcased Britain at its best, not just in track and field, but also as a country that can host major cultural and sporting events. My right honourable friend has been written to by over 200 of our top athletes. Some of them are members of Cambridge Harriers that meets in my constituency, and they're calling for the government to support the bid for the 2029 World Athletics Championships to take place in London. If successful, it will lift the whole nation. If successful, it will lift the whole nation. It will inspire a generation of new athletes. It will showcase Britain on a world stage, put £400 million into our economy. What's not to like?
I think the race has finished. Go on, Prime Minister. I thank my honourable friend. One of the greatest achievements of the last Labour government was that 2012 Olympics in London, and we all remember it. Can I pay tribute, given the response, can I pay tribute to the extraordinary contribution of Tessa Jowell to that Games? Agree there have been huge economic benefits of hosting major sporting events, as well as an important legacy.
We come to the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, 3 weeks ago, the winter fuel policy was set in stone. 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister U-turned. Today, the Chancellor is rushing her plans because she just realised when winter is. So, on behalf of the pensioners who want to know, can the Prime Minister be clear with us here and now? How many of the 10 million people who lost their winter fuel payments will get it back.
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm glad to see she's catching up with what happened 2 weeks ago. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, at the budget, we took the right decision to stabilise the economy because of the £22 billion black hole that they left. And the signs, we took the right decisions. The growth figures are up, the interest rates have been cut, and we got 3 trade deals. So we will look again, as I said 2 weeks ago, at the eligibility for winter fuel, and of course we'll set out how we pay for it. But because we've stabilised the economy, Mr. Speaker, we on this side are committed to the triple lock, and that increased pensions by over £400 this April. On their side, they say the triple lock is unsustainable, and I think her position is she wants to means test it.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister clearly has selective amnesia. I asked him 3 questions about the winter fuel payments 2 weeks ago, and he was floundering. The fact is, he hasn't answered the question I asked him. He hasn't answered the question I asked him. He can't tell us who will get the payments. All we see is U-turn after U-turn. His head must be spinning. Will he apologise now for taking the payments away in the first place, including to his own backbenchers? And can he tell us how he's going to pay for this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we took the right decisions at the budget because we needed to stabilise the economy. She needs to apologise for the fact that they left the economy in a terrible state. We had a mini budget which blew up the economy, and we were left with a £22 billion black hole. When she gets up, perhaps she should apologise for that.
Mr. Speaker, the OBR has said there was no such black hole. He's just given away £30 billion for the Chagos Island. That's his black hole. He hasn't stabilised the economy. Borrowing prices are higher now than any time in the last Parliament. He has not stabilised the economy. He has no clear answers on what he's doing. It's just chaos, chaos, chaos. He keeps making announcements with no detail. So let's move to another area of confusion. Can we get a simple answer? Will the government keep the 2-child benefit cap?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm absolutely determined that we will drive down child poverty. That's one of the proudest things of the last Labour government. That's why we've got a task force. That's why we've got a strategy, and we'll set out that strategy in due course. But we drive child poverty down. Under them, poverty always goes up.
I didn't ask him about a task force. I asked him if he will keep the 2-child benefit cap, and he doesn't know. It's just chaos and uncertainty. He has no details. He is briefing something and causing a lot of confusion to the people out there. But on that 2-child benefit cap, Mr. Speaker, I'll tell him this. I believe in family, but I also believe in fairness. Yes. On this side of the House, we believe that people on benefits should have to make the same choices on having children as everyone else. Yes. What does the Prime Minister believe?
Mr. Speaker, I believe profoundly in driving down poverty and child poverty. That's why we'll put a strategy in place. But she talks about head spinning. There's only one leader, Mr. Speaker, who's been praised this week by the Russian embassy. And if she carries on echoing Kremlin talking points like this, Reform are going to be sending her an application form for membership.
Mr. Speaker, I asked the Prime Minister what he believes in. He had to look in his folder to find the answer. His MPs behind him know what they believe in. He doesn't know. Mr. Speaker, he has been in government for nearly a year. It's only going to get harder. Yes. He's been in government only a year. It's only going to get harder and harder. The canned forced laughter, the planted questions, all of this is going to disappear because at every single point, things are getting worse. He has to ask Morgan McSweeney what it is that he believes in. But the fact is the chaos is being felt in the economy. The Chancellor said she would not be coming back with new tax rises, but she will have to pay for all of these U-turns which she's announcing out there, isn't she?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to look in my folder because here I've got the quote that she had on Sky News. I will read it, thank you. It's what the Leader of the Opposition says. It's worth listening to. What she said was this: Sky News, Mr. Speaker, Israel is fighting a proxy war on behalf of the United Kingdom, just like Ukraine is on behalf of Western Europe against Russia. Well, that was certainly noticed in the Russian embassy, because they put out a statement saying the Leader of the Opposition has finally called a spade a spade. Ukraine is indeed fighting a proxy war against Russia on behalf of Western interests. And they went on to say the illegitimate Kyiv regime, created, financed and armed by the West, has been at it since 2014. So they endorsed that. They want the detail. I've given the quote. That's what Russia said in response. She asked me what I believe in. I believe in standing by Ukraine and calling out Russia as the aggressor.
Mr. Speaker, it was our government that stood behind Ukraine and led the way in Europe. Everything he has said this afternoon is total nonsense. Obfuscation, avoiding the question. He doesn't have any answers. It's disgraceful. I asked him, Mr. Speaker, about the two-child benefit cap. He's talking about the Kremlin. He's saying everything he can to distract from the mess he is making of our economy. The OECD has downgraded growth for the next 2 years. He can't rule out tax rises. The police chiefs are saying they don't have the money they need to keep the public safe. Just as he's releasing more criminals onto the streets. His cabinet are squabbling with each other. They've said that they've lost control of the borders, but he still managed, Mr. Speaker, to find £30 billion to give away the Chagos Islands. This is total and utter chaos. 2 weeks ago, he was crowing about his historic trade deal and how he got 0% tariffs on steel. Now the steel industry will face 25% tariffs unless he does exactly what President Trump tells him to. It is chaos, chaos, chaos. And isn't the root of the chaos, Mr. Speaker, that it is about this Prime Minister, his decisions and his judgment?
The only advice, Mr. Speaker, she gets up on a Wednesday morning, scrolls through social media, never does anything. We're the only country in the world that isn't paying the 50% tax on steel. And we're working in the US, and that will be coming down. We are working on it to bring it down to zero. That is going to happen.
Order. Please. Let's listen to the answer, even if you don't believe you're getting one. It is how the Prime Minister wishes to.
What did she opposes the US deal, she opposes the India deal, she opposes what we're doing with the EU, and she opposes Diego Garcia. That's a vital intelligence and strategic capability. Absolutely clear that legal uncertainty would compromise that capability in a very short time. No responsible Prime Minister would ever let that happen. We have secured the long-term basis for the base. That has been welcomed by, Mr. Speaker, welcomed by the US, NATO, Australia, New Zealand, India. They're our allies. It's been opposed by our adversaries, Russia, China and Iran. And into that column we have reform, presumably following Putin, and the Tories following reform.
Claire Hammer.
Anyone who saw the 6-year-old girl fleeing the flaming shelter where her family were killed by an Israeli airstrike will carry those horrific images with them forever. These are very dark days, and Gaza is a stain on the soul of humanity, and it is a further shame that there is more moral clarity coming from Ms. Rachel on YouTube than there is from many world leaders who are complicit in silence. The Prime Minister said this week that Britain must be ready for war, and I ask, after tens of thousands of deaths, after a generation of Gazans stunted by hunger and trauma, when will it be ready for peace? When will it help to stop this genocide? When will it hold the Israeli government to account? And when will it recognise the State of Palestine?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to her for raising this, and she's absolutely right to describe this as dark days. And Israel's recent action is appalling and, in my view, counterproductive and intolerable. And we have strongly opposed the expansion of military operations and settler violence and the blocking of humanitarian aid. Mr. Speaker, you will have seen we've suspended the FTA talks and sanctioned extremists supporting violence in the West Bank. We will keep looking at further action along with our allies, including sanctions. But let me be absolutely clear. We need to get back to a ceasefire. We need the hostages who've been held for a very long time to be released. And we desperately need more aid at speed and at volume into Gaza, because it's an appalling and intolerable situation.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by welcoming reports that the Chancellor will give winter fuel payments to more pensioners this winter, though because we still wait the details, we will reserve our full judgment. But, Mr. Speaker, can I recognise the efforts of the Prime Minister to pull out all the stops to avoid President Trump's damaging tariffs? A letter from the King offering to water down online safety laws, even trying to send the Open to one of Trump's golf courses. The Prime Minister thought he'd secured 0% tariffs for British steel, but now Trump is threatening us with 50% unless we comply with his new 5-week deadline. Mr. Speaker, this is classic Trump, changing the terms of a deal he had already agreed. Does the Prime Minister share my fear that nothing will stop Trump messing the UK around, short of bunging a few £100 million into his Trump coin?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have a deal and we're implementing it, and within a very short time I'm very confident we will get those tariffs down in accordance with the deal. And I'll come back to him and update the House in due course, and I think the House will be very pleased at the outcome of that. But because of the approach... No, wait. This is zero tariffs on steel. And he says, no, they wouldn't. Well, let's come back to this in just a couple of weeks when we've implemented it. But they obviously don't want this. We back steel, Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House. They laugh at attempts to back steel on their side of the House, and that's a big part of the problem.
David. Well, Mr. Speaker, I had hoped the Prime Minister would be now beginning to see the sort of man that Trump is and start getting tough on him. So we will come back to this issue. But moving on, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the remarks of the Prime Minister on Gaza, because I'm sure all of us are appalled by the latest scenes. Starving people desperate for food, water and medicine met with chaos and violence. The US-Israeli programme is clearly failing. Nothing short of lifting the full blockade on aid will do. But given the Netanyahu government refuses to do that, will the Prime Minister take more decisive action today? Will he push at the United Nations Security Council for humanitarian corridors to get the desperately needed aid urgently into Gaza?
Minister.
Can I give him my assurance, because this is a very important issue, that we are working at pace with our allies on that very issue to take whatever measures we can to get that humanitarian aid in. We've been doing that intensively over recent weeks, and I can give him my assurance we'll continue to do that, because that aid needs to get in at speed and at volume, and he's absolutely right about that.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been over 2 decades since the Labour government banned the cruel practice of fur farming. But the job is not done. Real fur and fur products are still being imported into the UK. This week, I delivered a petition to Number 10 with over 1 million signatures calling for a fur-free Britain. My private member's bill would do exactly that. So does my right honourable friend agree it's time to close the loopholes, ban the import and sale of real fur, and finally put the fur trade out of fashion?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for her campaign? I know the Environment Minister will have heard her representations. We have commissioned the Expert Animal Welfare Committee to produce a full report on responsible sourcing of fur to inform the next steps that need to be taken, and we're committed to publishing an animal welfare strategy later this week.
Rachel Gilmore.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Molly is a single mother caring for a child with cancer. She cannot work because of her caring responsibilities. Since January, she has tried to claim disability living allowance and universal credit, but faced constant DWP bureaucracy. This bureaucracy is continuing right up to yesterday, when she received yet another frustrating letter from the DWP about her DLA. Will the Prime Minister assure Molly and others like her that his government is doing all that it can to help, and visit Tiverton and Minehead to see these challenges firsthand and work with me to find a solution?
Prime Minister.
Well, I can thank her for raising this case, and I'm deeply sorry to hear about Molly's situation. we are improving the lives of those that need it. But what I'll do, with her permission, the Secretary of State, the DWP, has just said to me, I'll look into the case. So if she could provide the details, I'll make sure that it gets proper attention and that we can deal with the particular problem she's raised. And I'm grateful to her, and I'm sure Molly is, for raising it. And I hope now we can take the action that's necessary.
Alex Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Wales, we will never forget how our steel industry was neglected by the Conservative government. Unfunded promises, they refused to make critical decisions, and they left Port Talbot on a cliff edge. So can I welcome the news overnight that this Labour government has secured an exemption for our steel industry from the latest US tariffs, a deal secured by this Labour Prime Minister. Can I ask the Prime Minister if he will take this opportunity to update the House on what further work he is doing in order to support our steel workers across Wales and across our United Kingdom?
He's doing great work with the Welsh Labour colleagues to champion working people in Wales. Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom is the only country in the world which won't be subject to the additional tariffs announced today, the only country in the world, and we are working with the US at this moment to swiftly implement the agreement that we've reached, which will see the 25% tariffs removed. We want that, they don't want that, and that's crucial. That is crucial for British jobs. We fought tooth and nail for our steel industry, saving jobs at British Steel and improving the deal at Port Talbot, and we'll continue to do so.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has repeatedly told this House that it is not for him or his government to determine what is and what is not a genocide. But that position is no longer tenable, because at the High Court recently, the Prime Minister instructed his lawyers to argue that in Gaza, and I quote, no genocide has occurred or is occurring. So the truth is, his government has made a determination. The question is, does he have the courage of his convictions, and will he repeat from that dispatch box what he told his lawyers to argue in the High Court, that he believes that no genocide has occurred or is occurring in Gaza?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I've said that we are strongly opposed and appalled by Israel's recent actions. I've been absolutely clear in condemning them and calling them out, whether that's the expansion of military operations, settler violence, or the dreadful blocking of aid. It's completely unacceptable. We must see a ceasefire, hostages must be released, and there must be aid into Gaza. But he talks about peace and security, Mr. Speaker. Compare their party, as I understand it, at this moment of global instability, as we go into a new era. What do they want to do? They want to get rid of the nuclear deterrent, the single most important capability that we have to keep the UK safe, harming the industry and harming the country.
Red Downey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Carnegie UK was established by Dunfermline-born philanthropist Andrew Carnegie, and they found that people under 49 are twice as likely to have been negatively impacted by the rising cost of living compared to those over 65s. Mr. Speaker, it's vital we increase opportunities for younger people and help put more money in their pocket. But sadly this week we saw the Scottish Government seek to close off an opportunity for young people by refusing to support new skills investment from Rolls-Royce, while the college sector in Scotland also warns of a funding crisis. Can I ask the Prime Minister what more he is doing to make sure young people in Scotland get the opportunities they deserve despite a failing and stagnant SNP Scottish Government?
Prime Minister. Well, I thank him for raising this. At a time of global conflict, it is staggering that the SNP policy is to block an £11 million investment for a new national welding centre on the Clyde. To block it. I was there, Mr. Speaker, earlier this week. I saw the huge potential for apprenticeships, for job opportunities and for young people. I support it. They block it. In England, Mr. Speaker, we're backing 120,000 more apprentices and £3 billion of funding as part of our plan for change. And despite the highest funding settlement in the history of devolution, they're cutting college budgets, they're blocking opportunities, they have no plan for Scotland's future.
Sarah Polchin.
Given the Prime Minister's desire to strengthen strategic alignment with our European neighbours, will he, in the interests of public safety, follow the lead of France, Denmark, Belgium and others and ban the burqa?
Prime Minister.
Can I welcome her to her place? But I'm not going to follow her down that line. But now she is here and safely in her place, perhaps she could tell her new party leader that his latest plan to bet £80 billion of unfunded tax cuts, with no idea how he's going to pay for it, is Liz Truss all over again. Although, considering I think she was a Conservative member when Liz Truss was leader, she probably won't.
Dr. Scott Arthur. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During recess, I visited Scottish Action for Mental Health's Red Hall Walled Garden, which I'm proud to say is in Edinburgh South West. It has operated for decades as a therapeutic horticultural centre supporting adults with mental health problems. Like similar community mental health services across Scotland, it is now under threat. It faces potential closure due to chronic underfunding of IGBs by the SNP government.
Yep.
Does the Prime Minister agree that facilities like Red Hall Walled Garden should have been a priority for the SNP when deciding how to spend the record funding settlement Scottish Labour MPs won for Scotland?
Prime Minister.
What my honourable friend describes is how health services in Scotland are utterly broken under the SNP. From people waiting too long for mental health support in his constituency to the Wishaw neonatal unit in Hamilton, which the SNP are threatening to downgrade. In 2021, the SNP said they recruit 1,000 more community mental health workers. They utterly failed to do so. If the SNP had a plan to fix Scotland's NHS, they'd have done it by now. Scotland needs a change of direction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir John Cunliffe's interim report published yesterday laid out the fundamental changes that are needed for our water sector. This is felt no more acutely than in my constituency of Chichester. We have a harbour that's in an unfavourable declining condition, and sewage is blighting our tourism industry. But with water bills from Southern Water rising by 47% for my constituents, can the Prime Minister tell them when they can expect to see the real change that this government promised and our waterways cleaned up for good?
Well, can I share her anger and frustration at the broken water system that we inherited, with frankly appalling sewage, higher bills and executives paying themselves huge bonuses. And the era of being rewarded for failure is over. We've launched a record 81 criminal investigations into law-breaking water companies in England, introduced the Water Act with prison sentences for polluting bosses and banning unfair bonuses, and will respond to the Independent Water Commission in full following the publication of the final report.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The proposed Hemel Health Campus, a partnership between the NHS and the Council, presents a perfect opportunity to deliver on Labour's commitment to neighbourhood-based care, bringing services closer to where people live, in facilities designed around their needs. It can also help to regenerate our town centre. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it is essential that all stakeholders involved in the project are as ambitious as possible and work to deliver a community hospital that builds on the services currently available and reflects the evolving needs of our town?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I pay tribute to how he's bringing people together to deliver better care in the community that meets the needs of his constituents? The proposals for the health campus will be open to public consultation. I'd urge the whole community to input into that to ensure the strongest investment case is put forward. I'm pleased that waiting lists in his local trust have fallen by a fifth since March 24 because of the investment that we've put into the NHS, which of course was opposed by the parties opposite.
Now, will put together.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the past few months, I've been meeting with care providers in my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon who deliver essential and expert care to some of my most vulnerable constituents. But like so many small businesses, they are under huge financial pressures, and the hike in national insurance is yet another burden many can't afford. I welcome the government part U-turn on winter fuel payment cuts following pressure from these Liberal Democrat benches. So when will the Prime Minister offer relief to care providers and other small businesses and U-turn on the punitive hike to national insurance?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we announced £502 million to support local authorities to manage the changes in NICs. We put £3.7 billion in additional funding for social care, doubled the Disabilities Facilities Grant, and introducing the first ever fair pay agreement for professional carers, including minimum standards for pay. But I would just gently say to her, her party opposed the budget which provides the money for the funding. You can't keep asking for more spending and oppose a budget which raises the money.
Natalie Fleet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first constituent to reach out to me was a brave bowls-over mummy who had waited 4 years, 5 months from rape to prosecution, with 3 postponements and multiple suicide attempts. I will do everything I can to use this chamber to speak out for women that are being so badly let down. How will the Prime Minister support me to make sure that when these survivors, these formidable women across the country come forward, they will get justice and there will be space in our prisons for their perpetrators?
Prime Minister. Can I thank her for raising this case so powerfully and everything that she's doing on it? The case she's outlined is utterly shameful, and for far too many victims are waiting too long for justice. Mr. Speaker, we're delivering a record number of sitting days, reviewing criminal courts to speed up the hearing of these cases and have as a mission to halve violence against women and girls. She talks about the prison system. The party opposite left the prison system on the brink of collapse, routinely operating at 99% capacity because in 14 long years they only added just 500 extra places. We will deliver 14,000 new prison places so the public are protected from these vile offenders.
Lincoln John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister told us during the general election that he is a socialist. What's been more surprising is to find out in the last couple of weeks that the leader of the Reform Party might be one too. As the Chancellor puts the spending review and locks it down, will the Prime Minister please remind her of Mrs Thatcher's all too pertinent observation that the trouble is with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money to spend.
Was it Kwasi Kwarteng that he replaced? And now he stands there to give lectures on economic prudence. You couldn't script it. But, Mr. Speaker, the difference between the Labour government and the parties opposite in Reform is we believe in properly costing our plans. They've got £80 billion worth of unfunded commitments. Liz Truss 2.0.
Chris Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Blackpool's own boxing champion Brian Rose uses his gym to tackle knife crime, antisocial behaviour and give young people a safe space, demonstrating the significant impact of amateur gyms. Thousands of these amateur gyms up and down the country operate on a shoestring and can't afford to keep the lights on, reliant on brilliant charities like Maverick All-Stars, Empire's Fighting Chance and Matchroom in the Community. Would the Prime Minister join me in thanking these charities, praising the volunteers in these gyms, and will he throw a haymaker behind these gyms, giving them the knockout support they need to continue their vital work?
Well, can I thank him? He's a great champion for how amateur boxing gyms can transform both physical and mental health and confidence in young people. And the time, I have to say, given by selfless volunteers is inspiring, and we should thank them for it. England Boxing are investing £9 million in the sport, and GB Boxing will also receive more than £12 million during the next Olympic Games cycle. And I know my honourable friend will be looking forward to Liverpool hosting the inaugural World Boxing Championship, I think in September.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since July, health services in my constituency have got worse. The Chase Hospital may close. In Borden, the promised health hub has not arrived. And in Haslemere this week, we've learnt that inpatient wards are being closed because of a lack of GP cover. The Prime Minister promised hundreds of more GPs. Could he possibly send 1 or 2 of them to Farnham and Borden?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I remind myself they left the NHS on its knees. The last Labour government brought the waiting list down to record lows. They drove them up to record highs. The last Labour government had the highest possible confidence in the NHS. They dragged it down to the lowest ever levels. Because of the money that we're putting in, we've done 3 million extra appointments in the first year of a Labour government. That's the difference Labour makes in power.
David Pinto-Chichinsky.
Mr. Speaker, the Environment Agency predicts that 8 million homes, that's 1 in 4 in England, could be at risk of flooding by 2050. But despite this, the party opposite presided over a tripling of the proportion of our flood defences deemed not adequate. By contrast, this Labour government is investing over £2.6 billion in new flood defences, including in the Greenway in my Hendon constituency. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it's a shame that not all parties share this government's determination to keep homes safe from flooding?
Prime Minister.
I thank you for highlighting this, because the party opposite left our flood defences in the worst state on record. It's prisons, it's NHS, it's the economy, it's flooding. Every single thing they touched, they broke. We're investing £2.65 million to build and maintain flood defences, and that means 52,000 more properties will be protected by March of next year.
Mr. Speaker, Glastonbury is experiencing a notable increase in antisocial behaviour. St John's Church was recently forced to close its doors after gravestones were reportedly used as counters for drug transactions. Constituents Peter and Melanie told me that people have been targeted when collecting their pensions with demands for money, leaving them feeling scared and overwhelmed. The lawlessness is deterring tourists, and business owners have told me trade is suffering. As visitors start to arrive ahead of the Glastonbury Festival, could the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that he will give the police the additional resource that they need to tackle this threatening and menacing behaviour to reduce the devastating crime wave sweeping through the town?
Well, she's absolutely right to raise this, and antisocial behaviour massively impacts on individuals and their communities, and that's why we're introducing 13,000 new neighbourhood police and giving them better powers, respect orders, so they can actually deal with what they see on the streets effectively. It's very important that we take this seriously.
David Burton-Sampson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This time last year, Southend United Football Club almost went bankrupt thanks to the mismanagement by the former owner. But on Sunday, they made it to Wembley for the National League playoff finals. And despite being beaten by Oldham Athletic in the 11th hour, it was like the phoenix rising from the flames to see them on the pitch. So will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Southend United on their outstanding recovery, and give me an assurance that the government's doing all they can to make sure that no club ever has to go through what our club went through?
Let me congratulate Southend on what was an incredible achievement. Commiserations for the final result. One of the police officers on my team, Mr. Speaker, is an ardent Southend supporter, so I know all about the team and the plans and the stadium and what it means. But I should also congratulate Oldham, of course, for that victory as well. Thank you.
Right, final question, Sir David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1999, the Prime Minister produced a book on miscarriage of justice, recommending ways of preventing them or quickly putting them right. But in 2014, people who had been wrongly imprisoned and then exonerated were only allowed compensation if they could prove their innocence beyond reasonable doubt. This ignored the decision of the court exonerating them, and actually meant that 93% of people who had been wrongfully imprisoned, often had their lives destroyed, got no compensation whatsoever. This is an institutional miscarriage of justice. Will he instruct the Department of Justice to review this matter and pay personal attention to actually getting this travesty of justice resolved?
Prime Minister.
Well, he raises a really important issue that I'm obviously aware of. It is right that victims of miscarriage can apply for compensation and appropriately do so, and I'll take away what he says and have it looked at.
Right, with that completes Prime Minister's questions. Let the
The leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, tried to get some answers from the Prime Minister, particularly on the winter fuel allowance. She asked him to apologise for his announcement previously that that would be means tested for pensioners. He actually said that it was a necessary announcement because it stabilised the economy. Of course, what she wants to know is, having you turned on that, what are the details going to be? Who will now be eligible for it? She also asked about the two-child benefit cap. Let's introduce my guests for this part of the programme. Luke Pollard, the Defence Minister, James Cartledge, the Shadow Defence Secretary, and Henry Zeffman, our Chief Political Correspondent. So, winter fuel allowance. 2 weeks ago, Keir Starmer got up and said that actually he would be going back on the plan to means test it, but we haven't got any details. Where are we on all of this?
So when Keir Starmer announced it 2 weeks ago, he said there would be a U-turn at some future winter, details to follow. The details still haven't followed, but we have had a crucial development today, actually from Rachel Reeves, an hour or so before Prime Minister's questions, when she said this winter, more pensioners will receive the winter fuel allowance than did last winter. How many more and in what way, we don't yet know, but it is clear that the government has accepted that, I think just simply in political terms as well as practical, the possibility of waiting one more winter before altering this policy was never going to last.
Well, Camilla didn't get much of an answer on how it would all work, so we're going to have a go. So, Luke, how is this going to work? There is no detail so far. If someone's watching this and they're a pensioner thinking about the winter and how they're going to pay their bills, how can they possibly plan? They're going to be feeling anxious about this.
I mean, it's precisely for those reasons that the Prime Minister announced that we were looking again at effectively the thresholds to see where winter fuel will be paid. I think the debate that's followed from winter fuel has, I think, accepted broadly that multi-millionaire pensioners probably shouldn't get the winter fuel allowance. And so the question really is, and that's the work that the Treasury and colleagues are undertaking at the moment, is at what level should that winter fuel allowance be paid? Bearing in mind that because of our commitment to the triple lock, pensioners got an extra £400 in the state pension this year, nearly £2,000 over the course of this Parliament. But it's right that we undertake that work. It's also right that a proper announcement's made in the proper time once that work's been undertaken. But as a local MP, I know there are people who are concerned. I want to address pensioner poverty. It's the reason why I'm strongly in favour of the triple lock. But having to make difficult decisions because of the mess that we inherited is, I'm afraid, part of being a serious government. And that is the difficult decision that we had to take in the budget because of the...
Well, that was to announce the means testing, but now it's your decision to go back on that. Surely you should have the detail ready before you make the announcement.
Well, the announcement on the detail is still to come, and it's right that we take the time.
So who will get it? So multimillionaires won't get it.
Well, I don't think multimillionaires should get it. I think we
yeah, most people aren't multimillionaires. So
exactly. So
how many of them?
So that accepts the principle of means testing, and so what we're now doing is looking at who should be there, where the threshold should be, and as we've heard from the Chancellor today and the Prime Minister, an announcement will be made once that work has been done. And I think that's the right place for us to get to. But it's also probably right that we signal to people who are concerned that a change will be coming, because that is, I think, helpful for those people, especially just above the threshold that was previously announced around pension credit level, that are concerned about what might happen despite the big increase in the state pension that was also announced. An announcement will be coming in due course.
So, James, Keir Starmer said today we had to make the announcement about that to stabilise the economy, and now they're going to effectively tweak the policy. You obviously think that multimillionaire pensioners should get the winter fuel allowance?
No, I don't. Okay. As Kemi Badenoch said recently, I mean, she did make the point that the current system can only pay it to everybody. Look, there's, for me, two really important points about what we've just seen in Prime Minister's questions. The first, Luke has just repeated this point, that this had to be done to stabilise the economy. Inflation was 2% at the general election. That is the official Bank of England target, stable inflation, despite all the problems we had after Putin invaded Ukraine. 2% inflation, fastest growing economy, and what really matters in terms of the so-called black hole is the deficit. That's like the overdraft of the country, right? It was 4% of GDP. When we came in 2010, just to put in context, it was over 10%. That difference, if last July it had been 10%, the difference would have been £160 billion higher. That's the NHS England budget. So it's a nonsense to say they had to do this to stabilise the economy.
You're arguing the economy was in good shape?
I think, well, low inflation, growth, and a deficit which was falling.
That no spending would need to be tweaked.
But it was the in-year public finances that was the problem, the black hole you left.
But the second point, which I think is actually far more important, the Prime Minister has just misled the House of Commons. He has tried to distract from being unable to give these... That's very serious. Hold on, Luke. You've had your say, OK? He's tried to distract from these very serious questions. What's going to happen to two-child benefit? What's going to happen to winter fuel allowance? By bringing up this crazy quote from the Kremlin, implying that somehow we are not pro-Ukraine anymore, which is frankly offensive to me, given how passionately I feel about the Ukrainian. And then he repeated, which Luke has also said, this idea that somehow, because we oppose Chagos, we are pro-Russian, pro-Chinese and pro-Iranian. Just to be clear, China recently came out and confirmed to the Mauritians, it congratulated them on the deal. They are not against the deal, they're in favour. So when he said that, he was misleading Parliament.
Luke, can you respond to that? I mean, why was Keir Starmer saying that? It was irrelevant in terms of the question he'd been asked.
No, I think it's very clear that there's a group of countries that back our deal with Mauritius to secure the operation of this vital
including
base.
China.
America, our closest allies, Five Eyes partners, New Zealand, Australia, our closest regional partner, India. There's a column of countries and individuals who back the deal because they see the value in it. And there's a column of countries that don't back the deal. We know Russia, we know China, and it depends where you want to find yourself. I know James gets very upset about this, but him and his party find themselves in a column of people who oppose the deal. I want to be in the column of countries that back our national security with this deal, like America, like our NATO allies, like our Five Eyes partners. It's a choice where you want to go.
Luke,
it's a choice which column
just
you
come
want to
back,
go.
and then I want to get back to
Luke,
welfare.
do you think I'm pro-Russian?
I don't think you're pro-Russian, but I do find that on this situation, you happen to be in a column of people who oppose a deal, which also includes Russia.
China support the deal.
But you've got a column... James, is a choice. This is politics.
No,
it's
I'm asking you a factual point.
I back our allies.
Does
I
China,
back securing this base.
Luke, does China
OK, let's just park... Can we just park this debate for a minute? Because I think viewers would also like to know some of the other unanswered questions that came up during Prime Minister's questions. The two-child benefit cap. Is the Prime Minister going to reverse that?
Well, in our manifesto, we said that we will tackle child poverty, which was a real stain under the last government, something the last Labour government managed to bring down in enormous numbers. We didn't commit in the manifesto to removing the two-child limit, but there's strong popular support, including, I think, right across the parliamentary party, for, if economic conditions allow, to look at what measures can be used to bring down child poverty further. Because we know, I mean, certainly as an MP who represents a constituency where a third of our kids are in poverty, that's simply unacceptable. And that's why the urgency and the impatience that I and the Prime Minister and other ministers have to tackle child poverty is laser focused. We've commissioned a task force that's looking at what are the whole range of policies we can put in place, and when, because of the careful stewardship of the economy, because it's growing the fastest rate in the G7, 0.7, that could give us options.
Let's just ask Henry...
The Prime Minister promised he would keep the two-child cap. He promised that before the election.
Henry, there's a lot of pressure, and there's lots of Labour MPs who think the best way to help solve child poverty is simply to reverse this cap, which, just to explain to people, is not about child benefit. It's about the welfare, it's about the benefits on universal credit that you can claim for, but it's limited to the first two children in a family.
Exactly right. And the government clearly is on the move on it. I mean, I think that's the worst-kept secret in Westminster. It is going to be abolished at some point. That is very clear. The government's public line on this has changed very pointedly over the last few weeks. And I think that's weirdly, actually, about diffusing a rebellion on a separate welfare question, which is the welfare cuts that we were talking about earlier this year, which are yet to come to a vote in the House of Commons. Just picking up on something Luke said, though, because there has been a very real strategic divide, I understand, in Downing Street about what to do about this. And that's because while it is extremely popular with Labour MPs to abolish the two-child benefit cap, all the public polling that there is suggests that the two-child benefit cap is a popular policy, including with people who voted for Labour at the 2024 general election. So that's why some people, including in Keir Starmer's team, have been trying to urge the Prime Minister to stay the course on this policy. It's clear he's not going to do so. It was interesting that Kemi Badenoch went out of her way today at PMQs to stress that she does support the two-child benefit cap, because Reform now are also calling for the abolition of the cap. So she's got a niche there.
Luke, which side are you on in all of that? I mean, some people will look at this and say this is about personal responsibility. If you can't afford to have more children, there's lots of people who decide they can't expand their family. Isn't that fairness?
Yeah, I've always... For me, like, the thing that keeps me in politics, despite all the shenanigans and the nonsense that goes on, is the idea that when I get tired towards the end of the day, I know there are kids going to sleep in the constituency I represent who haven't eaten that day. That's the kind of thing that gets me fired up. That's why I do this. I want to see new measures introduced across government that deals with child poverty. That needs to deal with high housing costs, that needs to deal with deprivation, intergenerational worklessness, that needs to deal with a whole range of problems. And if this can be part of that, then I think we need a coherent strategy, because child poverty has been rising under the last government. That's something that's a stain on our nation. I want to see it reduced, but I want to see it reduced as part of that broad strategy, so it works for not just the first child, the second child, the third child.
But do you agree with your colleagues that reversing the child benefit cap is the best way to alleviate that poverty?
Well, I want to see that broad strategy. And the thing for me, it's got to work, because I don't want kids going hungry. It's the reason why we introduced free breakfast clubs in primary schools, so kids can start the day with a full belly. They'll learn better, they'll be healthier, they'll succeed more in their lifetime. I want a strategy that works. That's why we're working on this new child poverty strategy. And if we can lift children out of poverty, just as the last Labour government did, we can rescue so many of those that fell back into child poverty over those 14 wasted Tory years.
OK, well, the cost of reversing that cap would actually be £3.5 billion. We have been hearing today from the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. She was talking this morning about her fiscal rules. They're the government's rules about not borrowing too much, about getting debt falling. This is what she had to say.
Over the next week, you will hear a lot of debate about my so-called self-imposed fiscal rules. Now, contrary to some conventional wisdom, I didn't come into politics because I care passionately about fiscal rules. I came into politics because I want to make a difference to the lives of working people. Strong and transparent fiscal rules are an indispensable safeguard for working people, and that is why my rules are non-negotiable. So let's be clear. It is not me imposing borrowing limits on government. Those limits are the product of economic reality.
So, Henry, just explain briefly the fiscal rules, what they are and why Rachel Reeves has them. And she's under an awful lot of pressure from some in her party to loosen them.
So, simplifying, there's a couple, really. One is that the government always wants to balance spending with revenue over a 5-year time horizon. And the other rule is that in the 5th year of that time horizon, debt should be falling as a share of national income. Now, something quite interesting that Rachel Reeves actually did just after taking office was she changed the way that debt is defined for the purposes of those rules. And that's why you still have her, even as she issued that staunch defence of her fiscal rules, unveiling billions of pounds of investment.
That's quite confusing to people.
Exactly.
On one side we're saying there's no money, we can't borrow anymore, and yet she's able to, I think, £113 billion she's talking about.
So she's saying that she wants to be able, a choice she's made is to find a way to be able to do that for investment, so long-term, longer-term infrastructure spending in particular. What Labour MPs, among others, want, and that was the debate that Rachel Reeves was alluding to at the start of that clip, is for her to also loosen those rules to make it easier for her to borrow for day-to-day spending. Because in that spending review a week today, there are going to be some pretty grisly, real terms cuts to departments that, you know, some people in her party, though not by all means all or indeed perhaps most, would like her to be spending more on.
Yeah, and actually one of the departments which is going to, we think, do OK is your department, the Defence Department, in terms of spending. But there is a clamour, isn't there, from our NATO allies for even more. 3.5% of GDP of the country's income. They want us to spend more. Are we going to spend more?
Well, we've already increased defence spending £5 billion extra in the budget for this year. We'll be spending 2.5% of our GDP by April 27, a figure not matched in any year the last 14 years. And we've committed to increase defence spending when economic conditions allow to 3% in the next Parliament. Now, what we're looking at in terms of the conversations ahead of the NATO summit is not just how much people contribute. And in cash terms, the UK is the 3rd largest cash contributor to NATO. It's about what capabilities. And as a country, we dedicate nearly all our fighting forces to NATO. We're the only European NATO member to dedicate our independent nuclear deterrent to the protection not just of the UK but our alliance. And the announcement in the Strategic Defence Review this week invested more in that, into our sovereign warhead programme, into building up to 12 hunter-killer submarines that keep our deterrent safe at sea.
It sounds like you're rehearsing your arguments to NATO about why you're not going to get to 3.5%.
Well, those conversations are for the summit, and you wouldn't expect me to play those out ahead of that summit discussion. But what the UK already contributes is serious. We're increasing our defence spending. We're doing that because we know that there are deeper and more present threats to our security, not just conventional threats, nuclear and cyber threats facing ourselves and our allies. And you only need to look at our friends in Ukraine to see what it means that if we don't deter aggression, because it will cost enormous amounts of money to fight a war. We don't want to fight a war. We want to deter aggression, and in particular Russian aggression, against ourselves and against our NATO allies.
James, if we just look at this Guardian headline here saying that NATO will force the UK to lift defence spending to 3.5% to appease Trump, would you spend 3.5%?
Well, we committed to spending, we would spend 3% in this Parliament, and we think we do have to make difficult decisions on, for example, welfare, which I'm going to come back to because I haven't had a chance to respond to the previous point from Luke, if I may. On the Strategic Defence Review, I'm afraid it's totally unravelled this week. We had the Secretary of State yesterday on the radio, was asked a straight question. He promised up to 12 nuclear attack submarines, it's a massive commitment. He was asked by Nick Ferrari how many you're actually going to make. He couldn't answer. He was asked how much they're going to cost. He didn't know. And the reason is because the authors of that report, the SDR, were very clear. It needs 3% for it to work. They don't have a plan to get to 3%. So every promise in it you can take.
How would you get to it?
You can take with a pinch of salt. And I've said. So when we had a plan to get to 2.5%, we were going to reduce the size of the civil service. When we said we needed to go further and faster, which Kemi Badenoch and I said back in February, we said we would have to look at aid and at welfare. Now, they've used the aid budget. So if I may return to your point on welfare, because I think, from my point of view, the key issue about the two-child limit is that the country can't afford to spend billions more expanding the welfare state when, yes, we have got to spend a lot more on defence because of the threats we face, because the US wants to focus on China and we're going to have to do more. In that context, a growing welfare budget is not feasible or sustainable. And I would just finish with this. You know, I had 4 children, I ran a business. We didn't increase child poverty, but the question is really this: should we tackle it by increasing the benefits system, or by driving the one thing that delivers sustainable growth, which is growth through businesses that are strong, not overtaxed? That's the key question for the country.
So, Luke, you can't deliver what's in your Strategic Defence Review.
No, we
what do
can.
you say to that?
The terms of reference of the Street Defence Review is based around spending 2.5% of GDP on defence, and that is the commitment we've made, brought forward 3 years earlier than anyone thought was possible. And bear in mind that we haven't spent 2.5% for a very long time. This is the largest sustained growth in defence spending since the end of the Cold War, and we're deliberately cutting international aid, moving that money to the defence budget and targeting that defence budget, where I do agree with James here, at British companies, especially SMEs, to make sure that we can direct more of that, having defence as an engine for growth.
If it's may.
Very briefly.
Because I think it's a really important point. He says it was the SDR was predicated on 2.5%.
That is in terms of reference, yeah.
That is not correct. The authors of the review wrote in the Telegraph this week and said the affordability is based on 3%. That was their words, and I respect them for saying that. They were independent writers. That's what they said. They don't have a plan to get to 3%. So everything in there you can take with a pinch of salt. You know, I could say I want to buy up to 12 Ferraris, but if I haven't got the money for them, I'm getting 0.
I just want to end on one thing, actually, Henry. There's a protest outside about Gaza. They're quite regular protests outside the House of Commons. But this afternoon, Jeremy Corbyn, the former Labour leader, former Labour MP, is talking about a Gaza inquiry bill. What's he trying to get?
So it's a 10-minute rule bill, which under the vagaries of parliamentary procedure is essentially symbolic. But what he is proposing in that symbolic structure is a public inquiry, a sort of Chilcot-style inquiry, I think he's calling it, after the Iraq War inquiry, into the ways in which the UK has approached what's happened since October the 7th, 2023. Now, usually there wouldn't be a vote in Parliament on that. Basically, the proposer of a 10-minute rule bill speaks for a few minutes and then that's that. There are some suggestions, though it's not certain, that some opposition parties might try to engineer a vote, because then you might see some divisions within the Labour Party on this issue brought to the fore.
And Luke, there will be people in your party who would probably want to vote for that. They want to have an inquiry into the UK's response to what's gone on in Gaza.
Let's be very clear, the situation we're seeing in Gaza at the moment is intolerable. We need an immediate ceasefire restored. We need aid at massive levels gotten to the people of Gaza.
Well, Ed Davey today called for humanitarian corridors to get aid into Gaza. Is that something you think should happen?
Yeah, and the Prime Minister replied to him saying that work is ongoing at the moment with our allies. And so we are saying that. But what's really important is what we're saying to Israel privately is what we're saying to them publicly. And that is that military operations must end, an immediate ceasefire must be restored, we must get aid in, and We must see Hamas release those hostages that have been held for so long. That is what we're saying privately, that's what we're saying publicly, and we're doing all we can to bring an end to the conflict there and to make sure that we can then move to a two-state solution with a secure Israel and a viable Palestinian state that will bring peace to this part of the world and the people on both sides of the fence
and James,
that desperately need peace.
Very briefly, there are some in your party who want recognition of a Palestinian state.
Look, our policy has been for a long time, actually just the same as Luke just said. In the long term, yes, we want a two-state solution. We all want that. You have to be realistic.
But not now.
I think, well, is it achievable in the current situation? There are still 58 hostages, 58 Israeli hostages. That is totally unacceptable. So it is frustrating how divisive this can be. But I think actually, and as Luke said, you can get in humanitarian support. We put a lot of money into humanitarian support when we were in government. But those hostages have got to be released. Imagine if they were British hostages. How would we feel?
Thank you very much. That's all for today, but I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on iPlayer.